Mike, we're back with another preseason conference special. This time we're looking at Conference USA. And, we already did the AAC. I talked about how the decks have been reshuffled, particularly around the conference landscape of college football. Conference USA really got reshaped, and we're also going to throw in some of the independents in this one. So, any thoughts on Conference USA before we start jumping into the teams?
Yeah, two thoughts. One, very lopsided for the top heavy teams. I think Western Kentucky, for example, is just going to roll through this conference, at least offensively. And then two, at some point, are we just going to stop having to learn new teams at this point? Because I don't think so. We're going to get to 150 teams that we're going to be projecting at some point in the near future. And it should be a labor of love, but it's not the most fun to learn Jacksonville State or Sam Houston State.
Well, let's just run down real quickly. The teams we're going to be covering Conference USA: FIU, Jacksonville State, Liberty, Louisiana Tech, MTSU, New Mexico State, Sam Houston State, UTEP, and as you mentioned, Western Kentucky, who probably runs through this conference pretty easily, which is, a big reason why we've got Austin Reed and Malachi Corley up there at the tops of their position in the preseason rankings.
Yeah, is anybody going to stop them? I don't have their non-conference offhand, but nobody in that conference is going to.
Well, I think what everybody wants that's invested in Western Kentucky is, can there at least some of these offenses that they're going to be playing against score some points, right? Like you've got Jacksonville State, and we're going to get into that. You've got Rich Rodriguez there. Sam Houston State has a pretty good track record, even though they didn't have a good year last year. New Mexico State's making some improvements under Jerry Kill. You got Sonny Cumbie at Louisiana Tech. So you've got a chance for teams to really score. We need them to score against Western Kentucky. So Austin Reed and that Western Kentucky, first team offense stays out of the field for 4 quarters. That's really what you're wishing for if you're a fantasy football owner.
Sounds like we're diving into Western Kentucky right off the bat. And now that I look at their schedule, like the opener, South Florida, I mean, we just covered them in the last pod. They got some pieces. They have an offensive-minded head coach, so maybe they can keep up with them. Holy Cross should be a blowout, obviously. At Ohio State, for as good as Austin Reed and Malachi Corley are, you don't have high hopes that they can put up, at 3 touchdowns or more against the Buckeyes. And then you get Troy, which was one of the best defenses in the Sun Belt last year. So combine that with a Conference USA schedule, which they should steamroll, but we don't have confidence that some of the opposing offenses can keep up with them. And I don't know. We'll see.
Let's just stay with Western Kentucky since we started there, right? You've got Drew Hollingshead takes over as offensive coordinator, right? So you've got to change at the coordinator position, but for us, that really isn't changing much of the value at quarterback and receiver at Western Kentucky this year. To me, and I know for you as well, that change just isn't going to be big enough for, I think, to really affect the fantasy value of those two guys.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's going to be air raid still. He comes over from the Mike Leach tree, so he was the quarterback's coach at Mississippi State the last 3 years. So I don't know. They spread it around at Mississippi State the last 3 years, but I attribute that more to they didn't have the receivers or a star-studded receiver to kind of feed the football, which that's not a problem at Western Kentucky, right, with Malachi Corley. So it's going to be a very similar offense. Going to throw it upwards of 50 times a game.
Dalvin Smith and Michael Matheson, the two next best options in that passing game, in your opinion?
Dalvin Smith for sure. You saw it in the bowl game. So there's a ton of targets that are vacated on the outside with Jalen Hall. And David Davis graduated now. So, yeah, he'll step into that outside spot. I haven't drafted Michael Matheson, and just, you do a deeper dive on some of these players. There's a ton of players, so you can't always get them all correct. But, with Matheson, the wide receiver 3 the last 2 years has combined for 130 receptions and 14 touchdowns. And where my hesitation is you got 2 slot receivers, right? Corley and Matheson. So maybe one guy is favored over the other. But if you look 2 years ago, Michael Matheson sorry, Corley in that same situation 2 years ago with Jared Stearns, they both ate. And Corley had 100 plus targets, even as the wide receiver 3, second slot receiver. So, assuming the offense is relatively the same, Austin Reed's going to chuck it. We know that. I think Michael Matheson, where he's going, kind of the 12th to 15th round range. I do think you're getting good value there, and I regret not having any shares of Michael Matheson right now.
What about UTEP, Mike? Let's just keep going in reverse alphabetical order. I think for you and I, the biggest thing with UTEP is Tyron Smith, who flirted with the transfer portal. All indications, all the signs are pointing that he's coming back, even though I don't think we ever got an official announcement that he's coming back, nor have I, are we going to get one? I don't know. What are you hearing with Tyron Smith? But we are anticipating him going back to UTEP this year, right? I mean, that's where our projections, it seems like the other publications have him back there as well. So I think we're okay with that one.
Yeah, he just needs to finish summer classes. And then his desire is to go back to UTEP. Phil Steele did list Tyron Smith with UTEP. So, he talks to a lot of those G5 coaches. So I kind of take it as confirmation there that we expect him back. And, maybe he doesn't have the upside as a top, 5 to 10 receiver, given that it's UTEP, obviously. But I think you're guaranteed 100 targets from Tyron Smith, and he averaged 17 fantasy points per game in full point PPR last year. He was consistently getting 10 targets a game for the most part last year. So real safe option there at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, undoubtedly their best option on offense and their big play guy for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to talk quickly. I was looking at it more. Guy I've never had any shares of, but Deion Hankins at running back. I think it's weird how Fantrax does these things, but I've seen him in some best balls that I've done with running back, wide receiver eligibility, which does get interesting. If your commissioner doesn't change that pre-draft, and if Fantrax doesn't end up changing that as well, because he really, obviously he's a running back, but UTEP is expected to be better this year, given that softer schedule with some of the new teams coming in the Conference USA. And it's interesting because I looked back at his schedule, the numbers didn't always equate to fantasy production, but if you look over his last 9-10 games last year, he averaged over 4 yards per carry in every single game. And now Ronald Awatt is gone. So there's not really a battle for carries on the surface. So maybe a late round draft pick, Deion Hankins could be a decent option in your lineup.
Yeah, that's a good call. I was going to mention that Awatt and Hankins, they combined for 23 carries a game in 21. And then in last year, they combined for 25 carries a game. Hankins had 140, Awatt 163. There's really no established running back. Hankins is what they have coming back. Awatt's not there, and there's no established running back after him. You could possibly end up with a running back in Hankins that could tote the rock 200 plus times in this offense this year. The possibility is there if there's not a legitimate running back too.
Yeah, they brought in some JUCO transfers. There goes Lady barking. We were talking about that earlier, my dog. So they brought in a JUCO transfer, Mike Franklin, another big guy at 220 pounds. I've never seen him play. So maybe he can challenge Deion Hankins for carries, or maybe it's 200 carries and wheels up for Hankins this year.
Is Lady just trying to say that Deion Hankins is a dog and that's why she's barking in the background? So, hey man, look, let's go over to New Mexico State. Jerry Kill, unbelievable job with that program last year, right? Diego Pavia at quarterback, I believe that's how you say his name. You got two decent options there at running back with Star Thomas and Jamani Jones. You've got a passing game that's going to kind of spread it around a little bit. But Pavia's got that dual threat ability. We've got him projected over 500 yards and I think 6 or 7 touchdowns. Is there some fantasy appeal in that New Mexico State offense right now? Maybe no. Particularly at quarterback.
In my opinion, no. look, this is a run heavy offense, so
Yep.
we're not interested in the wide receivers. They only pass the ball 40% of the time. They really spread it out last year amongst the receivers, so we're not interested there. Running backs, as much as it is a run heavy offense, they also distribute it amongst the running backs, and you look back and the RB1 in this offense only averages around 130 carries. So unless they are really, really good this season, and New Mexico State is getting into the red zone often, we're out on the running backs too. Diego Pavia is the guy that generates the most interest. If you look back, though, he averaged 27 fantasy points per game over the second half of last year. 3 of those were against Valparaiso, UMass, and Lamar. So he wasn't facing stiff competition. But then you look at this year, and we just talked about it with the Conference USA schedule, and then you look at his non-conference, Western Illinois, Hawaii, UMass again. Nobody. Auburn is the only one on the only team on the schedule that really it scares you from starting Pavia. So while I haven't drafted him, while I'm just not interested too much in this offense, you can make an argument that the defenses are so weak that he could put up some nice numbers.
Yeah, like you said, you're playing best ball. Depends on how deep your full FBS leagues are. So I think he's on the radar. It's not somebody you want to ignore, particularly if you're in a deep roster, full FBS format. So, talk about run heavy. It's a little bit of a theme for Middle Tennessee. You brought this point out in your conference write-up that last year the Blue Raiders under Mitch Stewart only had a 53% pass rate, which was his lowest as far as for a Mitch Stewart-led offense. And what's interesting is that Middle Tennessee loses their quarterback and 60% of wide receiver production. Does that make running back Frank Pezzett possibly a sleeper if that offense is going to lean on that run game a little bit?
Yeah, I like him. The only issue that I had, and I don't have the full context around this, but he only averaged like 3.5 yards per carry last year. He wasn't very explosive. Where he added value was really in the passing game. I think there was one game where he had between 10 and 15 targets. He might have had double-digit receptions, but while I like them to run the ball a little bit more, it's because of the backfield depth. Jaden Creedle comes over from NIU. He was a high 3-star recruit. Had a 100-yard game against Western Michigan last year. They brought in a JUCO, Romal Webb, who rushed for 8 touchdowns last season. So increased depth at the running back position. And then you got questions at wide receiver, questions at quarterback. So I think you could see them run the ball a little bit more in what is traditionally an air raid style offense.
Yep. Well, look, talking about offense and air raid, let's go over to Louisiana Tech, where we know they're going to put the ball in the air, right? Under head coach Sonny Cumbie. They bring in Hank Backmeyer, quarterback formerly of Boise State, right? They lose, Trey Harris to Ole Miss, but does that kind of, are we looking at, I know I am, Cyrus Allen as sort of that top guy on the outside there. We know we've got Smoke Harris coming back as well in this offense. What's your thought on Louisiana Tech offense now with Backmeyer, and is Cyrus Allen going to play that Trey Harris role from last year?
Yeah, my thought is I'm annoyed with drafting with you now because I didn't have competition at all for Cyrus Allen in the first 20 rounds. And now you decided to draft him in like the 14th round. So a little ticked off by that. But some people like Smoke Harris and he's been around, right? Established veteran, 220 some career receptions. So, and I think he can be good this year, especially with Hank Bachmeier, like you mentioned. But that would be an extreme anomaly if he became wide receiver 1. In the last 9 seasons under Sonny Cumbie, it is always been the outside receiver. As the wide receiver 1, and we saw that last year with Trey Harris, and look what he did. He parlayed that into a bag and beautiful women in Oxford, Mississippi, right? So I I'm confident that when the season comes to a close, that it will be Cyrus Allen. We saw him pop as a true freshman, 100 yards and two scores, two scores in the opener against Missouri. And then, he finished third on the team, but in receptions last year, but he showed enough as a true freshman, kind of reading the tea leaves. I know he scored a touchdown in Louisiana Tech spring game. So he is that kind of key piece at the outside wide receiver spot that has been, historically the wide receiver one in this passing offense.
The one thing that I have my eyes on right now with Louisiana Tech is that I'm really high on Marquise Crosby, who last year as a true freshman, I think he had about 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. Let me check it. 900 yards and 9 touchdowns last year. The only bit of hesitation is that they did bring in Craig Williams, the transfer over from Baylor. But I'll tell you, Mike, I like Marquise Crosby too, the sophomore running back for Louisiana Tech. I mean, last year as a true freshman, as I look at this, as I went back and double checked his numbers, he had 183 rush attempts in 12 games last year. He averaged 15 carries a game. That's pretty significant. We like guys that are going to get 15 plus carries a game.
Yeah. I'm in agreement, right? Really the only hesitation there is Craig Williams transferring in. If you get 900 yards and 9 touchdowns as a freshman, like that's a guy that has to be on your radar. I don't have any shares, and maybe that's my fault. I mean, he hit 100 yards in 3 of the last 5 games last season. I think I do have multiple hesitations, I guess you could say. Craig Williams, it's a high volume passing game, right? So he's got to get it done in the passing game for me to be a top tier kind of option at the running back position. And it's really not an offense that does throw to the running backs much, but you're getting him beyond round 20 because
Yep.
I think maybe the Craig Williams hesitation there. So at that price point, he is a bargain.
Yep. So let's look at Liberty, Mike. So out with Hugh Feeze, who goes to Auburn, in with Jamey Chadwell from Coastal Carolina, in with the 2-back offense. Interestingly, Dede Hunter transfers out. Quentin Cooley is now in. This is the same coaching staff that was at Coastal now at Liberty. Offensive coordinator Willie Korn follows Jamey Chadwell. We know this is one of those offenses where there's an A-back and a B-back. And Quentin Cooley showed out in spring, probably had a lot to do with Hunter's transferring. We're really high on Cooley in this offense. He's going to sort of be the dive back in this offense between the tackles. Caden Salter last year, when he was healthy before he got injured, he flashed that he'd be pretty good, right? So there's some pieces here in this offense this year. Still a little uncertain, but I think for me right now, Quentin Cooley's probably the most appealing piece of this offense right now.
Agreed. I think quarterback is definitely still up in the air. Chadwell brought in a transfer during the off season. Jonathan Bennett still there, which I've seen a couple projected depth charts that do have Bennett ahead of Salter. So, people have their favorites in that competition. We'll let that one play out personally.
He doesn't have Grayson McCall, is what you're trying to say.
I think Grayson McCall was the straw that stirred the drink. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, so I'm steering clear of the quarterback situation for now. Running back, I think, is where, we saw Dede Hunter enter the transfer portal, and we were like, okay, we're bumping up Quentin Cooley. Had a really solid spring. He's going to play that dive back type role, which was CJ Maribel, which was Shamari Jones. Shamari Jones rushed for 13 touchdowns in his season as a starter. Maribel averaged 20 points per game in 2 of his 3 seasons. So, I wouldn't expect maybe that kind of production right out of the gate, but that's the kind of position you want to have in this offense. One underrated aspect that I did want to mention, nobody's drafted their receivers, and I'm guilty of this too. I haven't drafted a receiver from Liberty here. And if you get later in drafts, if we start to hear that CJ Daniels, a name that you remember from a couple of years
Yeah.
ago, if he's healthy, Jamey Chadwell has proven that he really likes to feature that wide receiver one. You're looking at 30% target share, I believe, the last 3 seasons, if not 4. And
Yeah,
that's
matter of fact, Mike, before you even mention that, I was going to throw out CJ Daniels because for the last 3 seasons, Chadwell has had his wide receiver one has caught at least 990 yards. So he's had basically a 1,000-yard receiver, pretty close to it for each of the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and he's free. He is not being drafted at all. So, I would like more fall confirmation in fall camps. But if he's healthy, he could be a steal at his ADP.
Yep. So let's before we get to the new guys, let's go over to FIU. David Yost offense, FIU. I mean, look, not a lot to talk about. I really don't even know where to begin. I think I know where you're going to end this conversation, and it's probably going to be with tight end Josiah Miaman. I think is how you pronounce his name. I think that might be your most valuable player on FIU, but I mean, am I missing something right here? Because there just isn't a lot right now as far as fantasy appeal in that FIU offense right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would start and end my conversation with the former Iowa tight end Josiah Miaman, who I've been getting essentially free in every single draft. I've drafted him every single time in all drafts that I've participated in. You have, there was talk that Rivaldo Fairweather, his move to Auburn, was going to be a tight end to own, but I think we're overlooking the situation that Miaman's in at Florida International. You got 47 targets that now departs with Fairweather gone. This is a situation.
Who, by the way, was their second best receiver last year, Fairweather, their tight end.
Yeah. And so you got the tight end one typically under Yost that averages around 49 targets per season. Miaman had 33 by himself as the tight end 2 last year. And then you get those 47 targets now vacated with Fairweather gone. So, this is a pass first offense too. So,
yep.
I'm very confident that he can be at least a serviceable option at the tight end position with the upside of a top 15 tight end, given the system that he plays in.
Yep. So look, before we head into the independents, which we're not going to cover Notre Dame, we're going to cover those guys. We're going to cover Notre Dame with the ACC. So we are going to cover Army, UConn, and UMass. But let's get into the newbies of Conference USA, Mike. Let's start with Sam Houston State. They bring in a new offensive coordinator. They struggled a little bit last year. Brad Cornelson, I believe is his name, coming over from, I think he ran the Virginia Tech offense a couple of years ago. Fast-paced offense, right? So we can expect to see Sam Houston State move pretty fast. But it depends on how much improvement they can make as a team. Not a lot really for them in regards to fantasy appeal, except maybe the wide receiver. I know I've taken him in one of my best ball drafts.
I'll let you say it. I'll let you say his name.
Yeah. Hold up. I was just trying. I believe it's Ife Adeo. His brother is the running back at North Texas.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's good. Little
his brother over at North Texas, Ado Adei or something.
Yeah.
Ife, I believe, is his name. And so, yeah, they're brothers. But he had a really good year 2 years ago. I don't think was it 2 years ago he had a good year?
54 receptions and 10 touchdowns.
Yeah. And obviously they're taking a step up. But like we just mentioned, I mean, Mike, to the point I used in the AAC, Sam Houston State stepping up. They did struggle last year. They're an FCS team making the move up. But, they're playing, Jacksonville State. They're playing some FIUs. They're getting some Middle Tennessees into the schedule, right? So there's still going to be some opportunities for these guys to score some points. But should we be paying attention to anybody else in Sam Houston State, or this is just really just kind of wait and see? Because they did bring in Grant Gunnell, the quarterback. Seems like he's bounced around at 3 different programs. Doesn't the offensive coordinator like to move the quarterback a little bit in this offense?
Yeah. I think Sam Houston State, of the two teams making the move, couldn't have the most immediate success of the two. 75% returning production. You mentioned the OC. Prior experience at the FBS level at Virginia Tech. They're going to move at a quick pace, 73 plays per game on average, which would have been top 25 in the country last year had it been at the FBS level. And you kind of hinted at it. He does typically like to get the quarterback involved in the running game, which is very appealing to us because that boosts fantasy production for quarterbacks. They averaged around 125 carries per game. The quarterback won. So we got to determine who that's going to be. I know they brought in Grant Cannell, so you kind of think like, hey, bringing in a transfer late in the portal, he's going to be the guy. Some projected depth charts that I've seen have the incumbent Keegan Shoemaker as the guy. So that's going to be a situation that we'll watch during fall camp. And then the receiver, wide receiver one, which I don't want to butcher the name potentially like you did, but he was very good 2 years ago. If they get that offense up and running, he's barely being drafted as well, which you can get him late in drafts.
Yep, for sure. And then over at Jacksonville State, a name that not only just us familiar with college fantasy football, familiar with, but college football in general, because he's been around for a long time. Rich Rodriguez, head of the program over there at Jacksonville State. I think the big question was whether or not Zion Webb was going to get cleared for another year of eligibility. It seems like has that officially happened, or it seems like all signs are pointing that way?
You know what? I meant to check it pre-show, and now I'm checking it as we speak live. Okay, so this is interesting. He is listed on the official roster as we speak. So that was not the case during spring camp. And it was kind of in doubt because recently, I believe in May, they added Logan Smothers, a guy you're familiar with, at a Nebraska transfer. So kind of people were insinuating that maybe the extra year of eligibility wasn't accepted by the NCAA for Zion Webb. He is listed on the roster. So as of now, we're acting like Zion Webb will be the guy. And this is a quarterback that ran for 14 touchdowns last season. So, I mean, that is massive number for college fantasy production.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, even though we're not expecting to get a lot of him passing, Jacksonville State, like you mentioned, you feel like Sam Houston State's in a little bit better position to kind of be competitive this year, which only means Jacksonville State's going to be really playing from behind all year. So they're going to have to be go for most of the year. So, who knows? Maybe a quarterback like Zion Webb is worth a flyer in late rounds of deep drafts, full FBS formats.
Yeah, dissimilar to Sam Houston State, where we're kind of interested in the wide receiver a little position. It is really just the quarterback for Jacksonville State.
Well, look, before we wrap this up, let's go to the three independents, and let's start with UMass because, Mike, I'm going to throw this over to you. Where the heck do you want to start with UMass?
Well, we're going to have a little trivia for you, Joe. Okay. How many touchdown passes did UMass combine to throw last year?
Off the top of my head, I would say 2.
I thought you were going to go over. 4 okay. Touchdown passes last year from all quarterbacks for UMass. So we are completely out with them. And as a result, the wide receiver one averaged just 6.2 fantasy points per game. So we are just completely out until proven otherwise with the UMass passing game. Now, the running backs, people were high on Ellis Merriweather last year. The UMass running back combined to score the second lowest amount of fantasy points by a team in FBS. Only Virginia had less fantasy points scored from their running backs than the Minutemen. So I have at it if somebody wants to draft a player from the Minutemen, but
no,
stats, I think, don't indicate that.
That pretty much sums it up. We may as well just move on over to UConn, right? So, which is interesting because you had Devontae Houston and Victor Rosa last year, which, when those two were on the field together, that was a pretty good 1-2 punch. But things got a little hairy in that backfield with Jalen Mitchell coming in, the Louisville transfer. So now you've got 3 running backs. They've added Jalen Mitchell now. Does that change? I mean, look, the projections are based on Jalen Mitchell being there, but I remember we were having discussions earlier in the spring. That probably did just slightly downgrade Victor Rosa and Houston just a little bit, because there's at least a viable third option in that offense right now.
5 players last year for UConn had 60 or more rushing attempts. This is kind of it's a thing with Nick Charlton, the UConn offensive coordinator, that he has spread the football around, dating back the last 5 years at his previous stop as well. So adding Jalen Mitchell, they have very capable depth with Rosa, with Devontae Houston, who proved to be a really explosive option when he broke some big runs.
Well, I mean, look, what made a difference for them was that they were actually competitive, though, last year. They won 6 games. So that did help their running game a little bit. So if they're going to be able to be competitive again, we may see some similar production out of the running game this year. We talk about this with Sam Houston. We talk about it with Jacksonville State, with UMass and with UConn, some of these teams. Say New Mexico State last year and their ability to win some games under Jerry Kill. A lot of it has to do with, can these teams that have these type of offenses that UConn has established, can they stay competitive enough and in ball games so they can run their offenses, or are they going to be playing from behind? Because I'd argue that's why UConn played well last year. They played some decent defense and they ran the ball well. If they were 2-8 going in those if they were a 2-10 team, we probably wouldn't have seen those numbers come from the running backs.
Yeah, at least offensively, I think they should be just as good.
Yep.
The running backs combined to score the 56 most fantasy points in college football last year. They bring back 4 starters along the offensive line, and I believe I heard, from Mr. John Lobb, the resident UConn fan, that their left tackle might be a day 2 NFL draft pick this upcoming year. So they have a really good offensive line coming back. We've spoken about the talent in the running back room. So, I think they can keep it going. It's just there's a lot of mouths to feed within that group.
But without a doubt, that's really where the focus from a fantasy perspective is over at UConn. Yep. Well, let's look at Army, Mike. We're going to round this out with Army here. New offensive coordinator comes in, Drew Thatcher. He ran the offense at Nebraska. Kearney, offensive coordinator. So it's interesting you mentioned this in sort of your questions going into the season. We're going to see Army out of the shotgun a little bit. They're going to be a little bit more of a perimeter run team as opposed to more of just that triple option dive offense now, right?
Yeah, it was a rule change, I think, that sparked this change by the NCAA, where cut blocking inside the tackle box is no longer allowed. Probably caused too many injuries, but as a result, you're no longer going to see that fullback dive as prevalent in that triple option offense. And so they're going to be much more perimeter oriented this year, which could bode well for maybe slot back Tyrell Robinson, who's really explosive, averages 8 yards a carry his last 3 years. He's just never gotten that full opportunity. So maybe we see him become a waiver wire option down the line. This new offense that they're bringing, or they're implementing, I guess, is supposed to rival somewhat of Jamey Chadwell's offense that we spoke on previously at Liberty. So maybe Tyrell Robinson is an option, but I here's the stat that I think is most important with Army. Just one player in the last 9 seasons has finished in the top 40 in CFF at his respective position. That's quarterback, running back, wide receiver. So slim chance that somebody is going to be a fantasy option from the Knights.
Yep, that's a good point. So look, that's going to do it, Mike. We're already 2 conferences through now, man. We got this thing kick-started and ready to rock and roll. That brings us through. We're done the AAC, we're done Conference USA, and then we knocked out the independents as well. We're going to save Notre Dame, throw them into the ACC. So we're off and running, man. Let's kind of wrap this one up right here at Conference USA. That's going to do it for the Conference USA preseason fantasy special here over at the CFF site. So my main man, Mike Bainbridge. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. We'll see you guys on the next show. See you guys soon.